In the spring of 1927, in a Michigan farming town of 300 people, the most trusted man on the school board had a routine. During the day, he kept the school's books. He counted its money. He fought over every tax dollar it spent. And at night, sometimes, he let himself into the building with his own key and went down under the floor. He did this on and off for the better part of a year. Teachers greeted him in the hallway. Children ran over his head at recess. Nobody ever asked what he was doing down there, because he was the man they had elected to protect the place. On the morning of May 18th, they found out. And the explosion is not the worst part of this story. The worst part is what he did 45 minutes later. Bath, Michigan sat about 10 miles northeast of Lansing. Flat fields, dirt roads, dairy barns, and fields that ran flat to the horizon. 300 people in town, a few hundred more spread along the section lines. The kind of place where the bank, the general store, and the post office shared one block. And your credit was good because everyone knew where you lived. In 1922, Bath did something ambitious. Instead of a dozen scattered one-room schoolhouses, the township built one modern consolidated school. 2 stories of brick. Steam heat. Electric light. Real laboratories. Every child in the district under a single roof. More than 300 students from the first grade through high school. With motor buses collecting farm kids off the section roads every morning. Families were proud of it. Newspapers wrote about it. For a farm town in the 1920s, that building was the future, standing in the middle of a field. But the future came with a bill. The school ran on property taxes, and the tax on farmland went up hard. For most families, it stung, and they paid it anyway. You were paying for your own children, after all. To one member of the school board, it was not progress. It was robbery. And he intended to settle the account. His name was Andrew Kehoe, 55 years old. Born on a farm near Tecumseh, Michigan in 1872, one of 13 children. He studied electrical work at Michigan State, and this matters, so hold on to it. Andrew Kehoe understood circuits, currents, and timing the way other farmers understood weather. In 1912, he married Nellie Price from a well-known Lansing family, and in 1919, the couple bought a 185-acre farm in Bath Township. Bought it from Nellie's own relatives with a mortgage held by her family's estate. Neighbors described him the same way, over and over. Intelligent, meticulous, neat to the point of strangeness. He was known to stop work and change his shirt the moment it got dirty. He had the newest equipment, the straightest fences, the cleanest barn. He was also the man who shot a neighbor's dog for crossing his land, and who once beat one of his own horses to death for not working the way he wanted. And there was one older story, from before Bath ever knew him. When Andrew was a teenager back in Tecumseh, the family's oil stove exploded, and his stepmother caught fire in the kitchen. By the accounts that survived, the boy stood and watched her burn for a long moment before he moved to help. She died of her injuries. Nothing ever came of it, and maybe nothing should have. But it is the first explosion in Andrew Kehoe's story, and the people who study him have never stopped staring at it. Bath knew about the dog and about the horse. The stove was long ago and far away. People filed it all under temper. Farms are hard places. Nobody thought much more about it. In 1924, Bath elected Andrew Kehoe treasurer of the school board. It made sense at the time. He had campaigned against the new school and its taxes from the very beginning, and plenty of farmers agreed with him. Who better to watch the money than the man who hated to see a penny wasted? He took the job seriously. He audited everything. He fought the superintendent, a young man named Emery Huick, at meeting after meeting. He voted against spending. He demanded the school tax come down. And when the board needed electrical work done, Kehoe volunteered, free of charge. He knew that building's wiring better than the men who had installed it. The board thanked him for saving them money. Then the ground started to slide. Nellie was sick. Tuberculosis, she did not get better. There were hospital stays in Lansing, and hospital stays cost money. The farm was mortgaged. Crop prices were falling while the school tax climbed, and in Kehoe's ledger, those two lines crossed. He told anyone who would listen that the school tax was ruining him. Not squeezing him, ruining him. He blamed the building. He blamed the board. Most of all, he blamed Emery Huyck, the superintendent who kept asking for more. And then Andrew Kehoe did two very quiet things that nobody read correctly until later. He stopped making payments on the mortgage. And he stopped paying the insurance on his farm. Think about that second one. A farmer who lets his insurance lapse has either given up on his land or he has made other plans for it. In the spring of 1926, Kehoe stood for a township office he had been filling by appointment, and the town voted him out. A small election in a small place. He lost it. People who studied this case later kept circling back to that spring. A proud, precise, furious man drowning in debt, watching his wife waste away, publicly rejected by the town he believed was robbing him. That summer, Andrew Kehoe started shopping. What he bought was called Pyritol, war surplus. Millions of pounds of leftover military explosive sold cheap to American farmers all through the 1920s for blasting tree stumps and clearing ditches. Every farm supplier carried it. Every farmer bought it. A man loading crates of Pyritol into his truck was about as remarkable as a man buying fence wire. So that is exactly how he did it. A case here, a case there. Different suppliers, different towns, different months. Never enough at once to raise an eyebrow. In Lansing, he added boxes of dynamite. By the time he was finished, well over 1,000 pounds of explosives had quietly passed through Andrew Kehoe's hands, and not one clerk, not one neighbor, not one board member had asked a single question. And he had the perfect place to put it. He was the school's volunteer electrician. He had keys. He had reasons to be in the basement, under the floors, inside the walls, at any hour on any day. Through the fall and the winter, Andrew Kehoe worked beneath the Bath Consolidated School. He packed Pyritol behind pipes and between the floor joists, under the north wing and the south wing both. He ran hidden wires through the crawl spaces and tied the whole network to alarm clock timers and batteries. Hundreds of pounds of it, laid with an electrician's patience, a few feet beneath 300 children. He worked alone, in the dark, in a crawl space you could barely kneel in, month after month, and he never hurried. If a teacher had ever pushed open the basement door and found the treasurer of the school board crouched under the floor with wire in his hands, he had an answer ready that would have satisfied anyone. He was fixing things. He was always fixing things. That was the genius of it, and the horror of it. The lie was installed before the explosives were. Above his head, spelling tests, multiplication tables, recess bells. Below, the wiring. And out at his own farm, Andrew Kehoe was building something too. On May 16, 1927, Nellie Kehoe was discharged from the hospital in Lansing, and her husband drove her home. No one outside that farm ever saw her alive again. For 2 days, the Kehoe place looked normal from the road. The equipment in order. The fences straight. If you had walked the property, and no one did, you might have noticed the crates, or the wires threading through the farmhouse, the barn, the chicken coop. May 18th was a Wednesday. Exam week. The last ordinary morning. At about 8:45, children were at their desks and the township was at its chores. Then the Kehoe farm exploded. Not caught fire. Exploded. The house, the barn, the outbuildings, all of it, in a chain of homemade firebombs going off within moments of each other. Neighbors dropped what they were holding and ran toward the smoke, the way farm people do. They found Andrew Kehoe calm. He was in his truck, rolling out of the drive while his whole life burned behind him. He stopped beside the men hurrying toward the flames, and witnesses would swear to his words for the rest of their lives. "Boys, you're my friends. You better get out of here. You better head down to the school." Then he drove off. The men stood in the heat, trying to make that sentence mean something. 3 miles away it was about to. At 8:45, the alarm clock timers under the north wing of the Bath Consolidated School closed their circuit. The explosion lifted the floor of the north wing and brought the roof down onto the classrooms beneath it. The elementary grades. Mid-lesson. People heard it for miles out along the section roads. Where half the school had stood, there was now a hill of brick, splintered beams, and plaster dust. And under it, the children. Bath emptied into that schoolyard. Fathers came off tractors with the engines still running. There was no fire department in Bath, no heavy equipment, nothing but arms, and the men tore at the pile with bare hands, with fence posts, with pieces of the school itself. Someone got through to the telephone operator, and Lansing began sending everything it had. Police, firemen, doctors, lines of ordinary cars driven by strangers who had heard. Before the day was out, the governor of Michigan himself had driven up from Lansing, and by several accounts he took a place in the lines pulling brick with everyone else. Mothers reached the school at a run, some still in their aprons, and began calling names into the rubble. Some names answered. In one section of the pile, rescuers found a young teacher named Hazel Weatherby still holding 2 of her students in her arms. She had not let go. And through all of it, and this is the detail survivors kept repeating, nobody understood. A boiler bursts, a gas line fails, lightning strikes. Those are things a mind can accept. But there was no boiler in that wing. There was no gas line. The sky was clear. The men digging had no idea what had done this, which meant they had no idea that it wasn't finished. About 30 minutes into the digging, a Ford truck came slowly up the road and stopped at the edge of the crowd. Behind the wheel sat the treasurer of the school board. Andrew Kehoe looked out at the ruin of the north wing. Witnesses argued ever afterward about his expression. Some said blank. Some said satisfied. He spotted Superintendent Emory Hewick, the man he had fought across the board table for 3 years, helping to direct the rescue, and he called him over to the truck. Hewick came. Of course he came. Whatever anyone thought of Andrew Kehoe, he was the board's treasurer, and this was the board's school, dying in front of them. The truck was packed with dynamite, and over the dynamite Kehoe had loaded scrap metal from his farm. Tools, nails, chains, machine parts. As Hewick reached him, Kehoe raised his rifle and fired into the load. The blast killed Kehoe instantly. It killed Emory Hewick. It killed Glenn Smith, the town's postmaster, and Nelson McFerrin, a retired farmer. And it caught an 8-year-old boy named Cleo Clayton, who minutes earlier had walked out of the rec school alive. He had survived Andrew Kehoe's bomb. He did not survive Andrew Kehoe. The people of Bath had now been bombed twice in one morning, by a man most of them had voted for. The digging went on, because it had to. And then searchers working beneath the south wing, the half of the school still standing, suddenly stopped moving. Wedged behind the pipes, packed between the floor joists, they found bundle after bundle of pyritol. Wires ran through the dark from charge to charge, all of it leading back to a battery and one more alarm clock timer. When they finally weighed what they carried out of that crawl space, it came to more than 500 pounds. Live wired said half of Andrew Kehoe's machine had fired that morning. The other half had not. Investigators later concluded that the first explosion had most likely shorted the circuit meant to fire the second. His blast had knocked out its own twin. The south wing held the older students. Hundreds of children had spent the morning sitting on top of that charge, and the only reason they were alive was a wiring fault. The one mercy in Bath that day was an accident inside the machine of a very careful man. They cleared the building. The rescue paused, with children still trapped under the north wing, while men carried 1/4 of a ton of explosives out of the school on their shoulders. They stacked it in the open where it could hurt no one, and they photographed it. Those photographs survive. Crate after crate of it laid out in the grass a few steps from the school doors. The next day, searchers went through what was left of the Kehoe farm. In the ashes, they found the animals, and they found that Kehoe had wired his horse's legs together before setting the firebombs so that no neighbor would be able to save even them. Behind the ruins of the henhouse, in a cart, they found Nellie. Her husband had killed her at the farm, before any of it, in the quiet days after he brought her home from the hospital. While the town was still reading her name in the casualty lists, investigators were concluding that she had been the first. And on the fence at the front of the property, where every passing car would see it, hung a stenciled wooden sign. Kehoe had made it in advance and fastened it carefully, the way he did everything. It read, "Criminals are made, not born." It was the closest thing to an explanation he left behind. 5 words, prepared ahead of time, insisting that all of it was someone else's fault. The taxes, the board, the town. There is no ledger in which that arithmetic works. 58 people were injured that day. 44 were killed. 38 of the dead were children. No tax bill on earth explains it. In the weeks that followed, a coroner's inquest picked through every detail and every rumor, under oath. Its conclusion was plain, and it is held for 100 years. There was no accomplice. There was no wider plot. Andrew Kehoe was judged sane, deliberate, and alone. One man did this, and he did it with a clear head. Somehow, that is the hardest version to live with. Bath buried its sons and daughters through the last week of May. On some days, there were so many funerals that services had to be scheduled around one another, and the same neighbors carried caskets in the morning and again in the afternoon. The Red Cross ran relief out of the town's buildings. Doctors in Lansing worked on the injured for weeks. Help came from everywhere. Small bills in envelopes from every state. And one check came from Detroit. Senator James Couzens, the automobile millionaire, personally gave $75,000 to tear down the ruin and build Bath a new school. It opened the following year with his name over the door, and the children of Bath went back to class on the same ground. The town rebuilt. What it could not do was hold the country's attention, because Bath was about to be erased from the front pages by a single airplane. For 2 days, Bath, Michigan was the biggest story in the United States. Every major paper carried it. Reporters filled the town. Then, on the morning of May 20th, while the first funerals were still being held, a 25-year-old airmail pilot named Charles Lindbergh lifted off a muddy runway in New York, alone, heading east over the open Atlantic. 33.5 hours later, he landed in Paris, and the world went wild with joy. The papers flipped. The deadliest attack on a school in American history fell off the front page in under a week, pushed aside not by another tragedy, but by a triumph. The country reached for the future instead of the horror. Who could blame it? But Bath never got the reckoning. The books, the newsreels, the national memory. The story didn't fade. It was buried under confetti. Nearly a century later, it is still the deadliest school massacre this country has ever suffered. No gun, a ledger, a set of keys, and a man everyone trusted. In Bath today, a small park sits where the school once stood. The cupola from the old building survives there, restored, with the names kept around it. The town has carried all of this quietly for 100 years, mostly without the rest of us ever noticing. The past didn't lose this story. It looked away from it. This is CINDERGRAVE, the stories the past tried to bury and hoped you'd never read. If you want more of them, subscribe, because it was always darker than they taught you.